Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestling News 365. Hope everyone is doing very, very well. As always, we have a ton of WWE news stories to get into today, especially considering the events of yesterday with those big and shocking releases of the likes of Braun Strowman, Buddy Murphy, Aleister Black, Ruby Riott, Lana, Santana Garrett. There's a ton of news stories to get into today, talking about some behind-the-scenes information as to what was responsible for some of these choices in terms of WWE releasing these specific talents, their reactions. Don't worry, we've got it all covered. We're going to be doing this news video today. I'm going to be doing a reaction video talking about some of the industry's reactions, some of the talents' reactions to this as well. And I'm going to be doing another video today talking about where could we see these talents going? What are the likely destinations, whether it's AEW, Impact, Ring of Honor, Mexico, Japan. There is a ton of news to get into today. So let's start off with Braun Strowman. Let's talk about Braun Strowman and what maybe led to his release by WWE. Now, a lot of fans, myself included, on social media, and I consider myself a fan, of course. I think everyone that watches this channel is a fan of professional wrestling. A lot of fans seem surprised by Braun Strowman's departure, arguably the most out of all the talents that were released yesterday. However, Fightful Select, which of course is Fightful's Patreon service, so be sure to check that out, subscribe. They do a ton of just great stories, great insider information. They're the first to break a lot of stories. If there was any ever doubt to subscribe to them, yesterday should clear anything about that up. I mentioned it on Twitter. I did a tweet about this. I recently caved and signed up to Fightful Select, and the biggest frustration I have is that I didn't do it sooner. They have been the first to break all of these stories. Yesterday, Sean Ross Sapp was the first to break the story about these talents being released, and this wasn't a case of him just being first to be first. He thoroughly checked it, made sure the talents had been informed first. Not only is it credible, it's good journalism, so be sure to check that out. Now, Fightful Select is reporting that Braun Strowman apparently was not the most surprising departure among talent close to the situation due to Strowman's previous contract. Strowman signed, quote, a monster deal in 2019, and word is that he very much knew his worth when negotiating the contract with WWE officials. Strowman's last contract came down to the wire in the summer of 2019, and now he was signed well into 2023 under that recent deal. WWE sources claim that Strowman's contract was worth more than $1 million per year. He was said to have been very private about negotiating the contract until it was finalized. Now, the Monster Among Men, of course, have been with WWE since 2013. His last match came at the WrestleMania Backlash pay-per-view in the triple threat match of Drew McIntyre and the almighty WWE champion Bobby Lashley, but he was not used after that. He did do a promo the following night on Raw, hyping up WWE's return to touring. Strowman leaves the company a former Universal Champion, Intercontinental Champion, two-time Raw Tag Team Champion, the 2019 Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royale winner, and the Greatest Royal Rumble winner, and the 2018 Men's Money in the Bank winner. This winner. There's certainly a lot of accolades that this guy had achieved during his career. And look, I know that, to be honest, the contractual situation doesn't make it any less surprising, frankly, for me. Is he on a big contract? Yes. But you have to look at it in context. I think you have to look at it at the time that he was negotiating his contract. I recall, again, 2019. I remember these stories quite vividly at the time that Braun Strowman was negotiating a new deal with WWE. That was quite common knowledge, and it was common knowledge once he had re-signed with the company. And essentially, the moment he re-signed with WWE in 2019, immediately, like that, he was just thrust back into the main event picture. Do you remember that whole situation with Seth Rollins back in 2019? Just after SummerSlam of that year, he started feuding with Seth Rollins over the Universal Championship. They became Raw Tag Team Champions. He was involved in a segment with Stone Cold Steve Austin in Madison Square Garden with Seth Rollins as well, that contractual signing, all that kind of stuff. He was heavily featured in. And at the time, he got this big renewed push, and everyone went, why did he get this big renewed push? Well, it was because he just signed a massive deal with WWE at the time in 2019. And that's a period of time as well. And I mentioned this on social media a couple of times over the course of the last 24 hours or so. And people get quite frustrated hearing this, but it's true. It's true. 2019 was such an interesting and crucial period for WWE because of the emergence of AEW and the money that WWE had at that period of time. WWE had a ton of money at that period of time. They still do, obviously, regardless of them letting go all of these talents and employees and office staff, etc. They still have a lot of money, but during that period of time, that's when WWE was really flaunting the wealth that they had. Obviously, they had signed the deal to do all of those pay-per-views in Saudi Arabia, whether it was Crown Jewel, Super Showdown, a 10-year deal worth millions and billions of dollars. They just signed the agreement to go on Fox. They were going to go on Fox at the end of the year. That was worth over $1 billion. They just signed a new agreement with NBC Universal for Raw as well. That was worth billions. So they had all of this money at their disposal that they didn't have previously. And when it came to contracts coming up at that period of time, because whilst they just got this massive influx of cash from all of these deals, lots of contracts were expiring or set to expire over that course of 12 months there. And this is prior to the pandemic, so business is good. And essentially what happened is people like Braun Strowman, their contract came up. The Good Brothers, their contract came up. AJ Styles, his contract came up. All of these contracts were set to expire. And AEW was on the horizon. It was a viable alternative. No one really knew what AEW was really going to consist of at that time. But WWE were worried. There's no doubt about that. WWE were worried. They know the wealth that the Khan family has. And certainly they knew that AEW Dynamite was going to be going on TNT, so they had a good television deal that could do a good audience, and they had money, and they were concerned. They watched Double or Nothing in May, and there was this concern by WWE, okay, we have a competitor here, a strong competitor, so we've got to make sure that we don't have talent going over them. We've got to make sure we do our best to not make AEW stronger. So they get NXT, they put it on USA Network on Wednesday nights, regardless of what Triple H and WWE wants to say. That was a counter-programming measure. There's no doubt about that. And with talents like the Good Brothers, Triple H did the charm offensive and got them to stay. Same with AJ Styles, offered them a lot of money, a very substantial amount of money to stay. And it was the same with Braun Strowman, offered him a lot of money to stay. And the reason why is because they were worried about Braun Strowman, AJ Styles, the Good Brothers, whoever, about going to AEW. Subsequently as well, people like Brody Lee talked about this, people like FTR talked about this as well, is that even though they turned WWE down in terms of a contract extension, WWE at that period of time was offering talent money and new contracts and increases. Rhino talked about this as well. Rhino, I mean, no disrespect to Rhino, but Rhino's not going to move the needle, is he, massively? But they were offering people like Rhino, people like Brody Lee, people like FTR a substantial amount of money to sit at home, new contracts, improved terms, just to sit at home. They said, look, we've got nothing for you. We don't know what we're going to do with you. Creative has nothing for you right now, but we don't want to lose you. Previously, when Creative had nothing for you, that would mean that you're going to get let go. During that time period, Creative had nothing for you, but we'll pay you to stay at home so you can't go anywhere else. Some people took it, some people didn't, because some people said, I don't care about the money, I want to work. Some people said, well, I've got families to look after and money's money, I'm going to take it. Braun Strowman, like the report says, knew his worth at the time, knew the landscape. I find it funny when it says he was very private about negotiations. Well, some people are public, some people aren't. Randy Orton was very public about the negotiations. He used and leveraged AEW to get himself a better deal. A lot of people did during that period of time. And now, for whatever reason, and we'll touch on this in a second, but WWE is looking at these contracts, these bigger contracts that they gave out at the time, and they're basically saying, look, we don't think it's a financially viable deal anymore. And regardless of how much money Braun Strowman is on, or was on, I still find it surprising they let him go. Was he the most over character on the roster at this point? No. They had their chance of him. They ruined it. They missed the boat with Braun Strowman massively. They had a crucial period of time in 2016 from when he debuted as a singles on Monday Night Raw to certainly 2017 where the guy was over. I mean, he was over. He was popular. When his music hit, he felt like a massive, massive deal. And so many people said it's just a matter of time before this guy becomes a Universal Champion and becomes just this monster, pun intended, monster babyface. And they got it wrong. And Braun Strowman is a perfect example of everyone has their time. You have to capitalize on it during that period of time, because if you miss the boat, that's it. You can't go back. You can't go back and go, well, we're going to get him over again. No, you had a moment in time, you missed it. And look, Strowman, he still got the money, he still got the contract, so good for him. But this is still a guy that they had invested a lot of time and money into. He was still a commodity for WWE. Certainly an attraction, right? We're returning to touring soon, and you're going to have to start selling tickets for these events. Strowman, does he sell tickets? He's an attraction. There's no doubt about that. He's an attraction, and there's still more they could have done with that character. There's still more they could have done with him. I wasn't massively a fan of the Strowman Express, and I wasn't a massive fan of the choo-choo noises and all this kind of stuff. That wasn't for me, but this was still a guy that was in a WWE Championship match 2 weeks ago. This is still a guy that was Universal Champion last year, and now he's gone. So irrespective of the contract he was on, I still find it quite surprising. But look, who knows what will happen with Braun Strowman. His future, and we will touch on this in another video later today, but It's interesting because I wouldn't frankly be totally surprised if Braun Strowman didn't go to another pro wrestling company. I wouldn't be surprised if in a year's time Strowman's back. Who knows what WWE's going to look like if they're sold, if touring goes well, if things do open up as they're expected to and all this kind of stuff. Strowman could be back in 6 months' time. We don't know. Strowman's openly said, well, I don't want to work for any other company. That's very easy to say when you've got over $1 million in your bank account from the company every year. I wouldn't want to leave either. So who knows what happened. He had a very strong loyalty to Vince McMahon and WWE. They let him go. So it'll be interesting to see where he ends up. But irrespective for me of the contract that he had, I mean, if they're really looking at it just on paper in terms of dollars and cents of how much this guy is worth, and they've decided he's not worth that money, that's got to hurt. That's got to hurt. And it's indicative of where WWE finds themselves right now, whether it is themselves preparing to be sold. So it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. Speaking of fascinating as well, Aleister Black. There is a ton of information when it comes to Aleister Black at the moment, and he's been very, very vocal and very, very, well, maybe vocal is not the right word, but open, talking about his release, talking about his creative struggles, and there's certainly a ton of information about Aleister Black and the circumstances surrounding his departure from the company yesterday. Now, WWE employees associated with putting together Aleister Black's recent SmackDown storyline reportedly did not know he was being released before yesterday's announcement. Now, it's certainly very interesting because a lot of people were very surprised by this. Aleister Black did a post-release statement, and he seemed surprised by this. That will be in the other video, and he was noted that he was completely surprised by the departure. Now, of course, Aleister Black had just returned to WWE television in late April with vignettes for a repackage, a different version of the character after being off of television for 6 months. He then made his SmackDown return in late May and attacked Big E to begin a new feud between the two superstars. Now, there was no follow-up on last week's episode of SmackDown on Fox, but it was noted before that the creative decision had been made to keep Black and Big E off of television for last week to allow the storyline to breathe. It was breathing so much that Aleister Black is now gone from the company. That's a big breath. Now, in an update, Fightful Select once again reports that many people behind the scenes in WWE that were associated with putting this storyline together did not know that Black was going to be released. Furthermore, WWE creative writers were recently told to stop making pitches for Black, but were not told why. That would certainly ring alarm bells. I would be fascinated to know how recently, because if it was said to be 3 or 4 weeks ago, that would be an indication that this has been the plan for a while. But if it was the plan for a while, why did you have Black return 2 weeks ago? That just seemed odd. So when they say recently, do they mean a couple of days? Was that decision made a couple of days ago? I don't know. It was also noted in this report that Black versus Big E, the feud did have no long-term endgame. Maybe that's because they were told to stop thinking of one. I don't know. Now, Aleister Black went live on his wife Thea Trinidad, also known as Zelina Vega's gaming account yesterday afternoon, and said that he was told budget cuts are the reason for his departure. Now, obviously, when you're speaking of Zelina Vega, Thea Trinidad, it was noted last month she was at the Performance Center and said to be on her way back to the company after being released in 2020 due to issues regarding the third-party edict. Now, there's no report on if there's any specific plans to have Zelina Vega return, if she's signed a contract, what's going on. So that whole situation is very, very surprising, but the conversations regarding Aleister Black didn't stop there. As I mentioned, Aleister Black was on Twitch yesterday talking extensively about his departure. He posted a lot of tweets and has been very open about his departure. He sent out a special shout-out to Paul Heyman, of course, was the executive director of Raw during Aleister Black's time period on there, and was a big advocate, pun intended, for Aleister Black. And reportedly, it was between Aleister Black or Drew McIntyre to win the Royal Rumble in 2020 and face Brock Lesnar and become the WWE champion. Now, ultimately, the decision was to go with McIntyre, but Heyman was a big supporter of Aleister Black, and once Heyman departed his role as executive director of the Red Brand, Aleister Black's push subsequently faded off at the same time. Now, Aleister Black, now known as Tommy End, his real name, has said, quote, "Before I forget, a special mention goes to Paul Heyman for always having my back and to this day acts like a mentor to me. Since day one, Paul was in my corner." Now, obviously, as I mentioned, he was on Twitch for a considerable amount of time yesterday, Tommy End, Aleister Black, and he's revealed quite a lot of information around his departure, the storylines he was involved in over the course of the last 18 months, his departure off of television, the new character, what was planned for the new character, all this kind of stuff. It's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. He said that Black was set for a big moment, but revealed it did not happen. He said, quote, "There was a moment where I was supposed to win. I think it was the United States Championship. But then Vince's consensus was, I don't want to have him win his first title in front of no audience. So there was always good stuff. There's a lot of good stories, a lot of almost moments, so I can't be negative." Now, Black also had stated during the stream that he's not bitter and he had a good relationship with Vince McMahon. He recalled the first time he went off script in a promo. He said, quote, "A lot of the promos weren't my writing, unfortunately. Do you guys remember the Money in the Bank promo that I did on AJ Styles where I stepped out of the dark? Well, that was the first time I did, well, all right, F it. I'm going to do what I want to do. If they get mad at me, they'll get mad at me." And that promo got praise. Then they never went back to it. Black also recalled another turning point for him from a creative standpoint, this time during a match in NXT. He said, quote, "I think after my match with Dream, I remember apparently a lot of people in the wrestling world were like, whoa, what's going on there? And the cool things was that was the first time they gave me complete freedom to just do my own match. They put trust in me. I think when I proved I could do a good storytelling match and I could lead a match and take someone else and take them to the next level, it proves you can be more than just a star yourself. You can uplift other people too, which is great." Now, Black later was called up with some other NXT stars and was putting a tag team with Ricochet. He described what that meant for him in his career. He said, quote, "Fast forward to the main roster, I think the last 3-4 months of me being in NXT where I was tagged with Ricochet were probably professionally some of my favorite moments in wrestling because me and Trevor would have Raw on Monday, SmackDown on Tuesday, and then NXT on Wednesday. You get one day off and Friday back on the road. And we did that for months. So we got well oiled and I felt that's where I had the most fun. I really felt like a professional wrestler. I felt like a professional. I felt I was untouchable at that point. You could have thrown anything at me and I would have been able to knock it out of the park. You always have to work within the boundaries that they give you. And I felt that is the true professional. If there's no cuffs, you can do whatever you want. It's a different landscape. But if you're able to shine in a place where you have boundaries and you're surrounded by rules, I'm a big fan of having boundaries. It forces me to be more creative. And if you shine there, I feel like that's like a testimony to being professional. Now, Black also revealed a now AEW tag team he enjoyed working with. He said, quote, "I always loved wrestling at the time, the Revival. Me and them have the same way of thinking when it comes to upholding rules and making sure everything works within the boundaries because that's what makes it fun. That's what makes competition fun. That forces me to be creative in a very different way, and I've always liked that. I've always liked challenging myself. That's what made me a better professional wrestler. A lot of the times I have to think on my feet. A lot of the times we just went out and did things. Oh, you guys have 3 minutes, go home. We actually had a whole 10-minute thing planned, or the other way around. You have 4 minutes, guys. They just added 5 minutes and now we have to think. They did that with me and Murphy a couple of times where we went out there and they were like, hey guys, you got an extra 5 minutes. And you just have to figure it out. I love that. I love that. I love being able to work on the fly. I thrive on that kind of stuff. And it's a good point. I remember I've mentioned this before, in my own work. I mentioned this in my own work in a meeting that I had once, that creativity to me, if you've got carte blanche and you can do whatever you want, and it doesn't matter, you've got full creative freedom, you can do whatever you want, it's going to be great. Sometimes that isn't the time where you're being the most creative, frankly. It's not. Sometimes creativity is having boundaries, is having restrictions, going, okay, you have to make this work, these are your parameters, this is your budget, this is what you've got, make it work. That's creativity. Creativity isn't just being like, okay, do whatever you want. Creativity is like, you have to do this. It's like the MacGyver principle. You have to make this, this, and this. You've got this, this, and this, a bit of string, a bit of glue, a bit of tape, and you've got to make it work, and it's got to be the best thing ever, and you've got 5 minutes. Go. That's creativity. So I totally agree with Aleister Black on there. You're getting the impression he had a lot to say yesterday. Now, he also said that he's not sad, he's not depressed. I'm okay. I'm sure there's going to be dark days coming up. There's going to be bad days. It's kind of up and down. And I think we should have a nice conversation. I'm getting texts like crazy. There's a crazy hype train going on. Black revealed that the reason he was given from his release from the company, it was an answer similar to the one that Alexander Wolf was given. He was told his WWE contract wouldn't be extended recently for whatever the reason. Black is thankful for his time in WWE. He said, quote, "I got told it was budget cuts. Well, whether that is budget cuts or not doesn't matter. I'm here now and I've had a great time. I've had a phenomenal 4 or 5 years in the WWE. If I didn't, we wouldn't have had so many viewers right now. And I'm just really thankful for a lot of the things WWE has done for me. I'm most thankful I was giving a platform that, although in a limited amount, I was able to give you guys parts of myself and my character. One part that is difficult for Aleister Black is the struggle to get himself on television, calling the last 2 years a slow death for him. He described his interactions with WWE Creative as them finding him intriguing, while Black described himself as wanting to be like the metal band kids listen to while rebelling. He said, quote, "It's bittersweet because I owe everything to WWE, not to diminish my prior work, but obviously my prior work had gotten me to the dance, and I think the last 2 years was a slow death for me. I think it was very hard to get the creative approved, despite numerous conversations that I've had with Vince and everybody trying really hard. It did numbers on my self-esteem too, because at one point you're like, the ratings are good, the numbers are good, the merch is good. Why are we not, It's one of those things where they're like, the word is intrigue was always there, or we find you very intriguing. I'm like, okay, good, let's present something there, let's do something. Which to me, that would be so frustrating. Can you imagine the frustration? I mean, I empathize massively with Aleister Black there. He's doing good numbers. Like he said, he's having great matches, great promos, every views and metrics, whatever they want to look at, whether it's social media, YouTube, whatever they want to look at, it's all good. And he goes, right, let's do something. And they go, we find you intriguing. What does that mean? What does that mean? We find you intriguing. That's basically saying we find you interesting, but nobody on this creative team gets you. So we're not going to come up with anything for you because we can't. Well, maybe listen to Aleister Black. I'm sure he's got some ideas then. And it's this idea that's not the first time we've heard that, by the way. I remember hearing some reports when it comes to Riddle. Vince McMahon finds Riddle intriguing. He doesn't understand him, but he finds him intriguing and funny. And look at Riddle right now. He's on Monday Night Raw with Randy Orton. I guess it's whatever term of intriguing that they find. That must be beyond frustrating. We find you intriguing, but we're letting you go. He then carried on saying, I've thrown so many things at the wall because I keep creating characters and gimmicks and storylines over and over and over and over, And it's like, I think my character, like the first conversation I ever had, the funniest thing is I remember all of these things. I said to Hunter, I said, look, I just want to be all the metal bands that kids used to rebel against the system, against their parents. As cliche did that sound, it's relatable, right? Because everybody, especially nowadays, especially when you're young, it's so difficult to be understood by a different generation. I wanted people to have the consensus of understanding that my character was a cool dude, a mysterious guy, and at the same time having a hard-hitting style, but also having a sense of being relatable to the point of, I understand what this character is going through. And I think that's really telling, what he's just said there. I think it's really telling where he says it's so difficult to be understood by a different generation. And I don't know, and I don't think many people know really the diversity or how that creative team is made up of, but we certainly do know the people in charge of that creative process. We know the Vince McMahons and the Bruce Pritchards, and it's a great point. It's so difficult to be understood by a different generation. It's very obvious by the use of the word intrigue, or we find you intriguing, that Vince McMahon and Bruce Pritchard and whoever was in charge during that period of time didn't get Aleister Black. Maybe the only person that did was Paul Heyman, because certainly he was the one that was pushing him. They didn't get Aleister Black. They found him intriguing, but different generation, different mindsets. And the reason he thrived in NXT as well is Triple H. He's a fan of metal bands. So if he's using that analogy to Triple H, I want to be like, the people that used to listen to, metal bands and rebelled against it. Triple H is a big fan of metal bands, so surely he gets that. NXT is an underground, or was an underground brand. It was meant to be rebelling against the system that's WWE, even though they were WWE. And the people in charge on the main roster of Raw and SmackDown, different generation, don't get an Aleister Black character. They have no idea. When he walks into the room, you can imagine Bruce Pritchard and Vince McMahon look at him and go, well, The Undertaker looks different, because that's probably what they think. Now, one positive for Aleister Black he was sure to point out was that he did meet his wife, Thea Trinidad, when he was in WWE. He also didn't dismiss any possibilities in the future, saying weirder things had happened. He said, quote, I'd say absolutely. I'd say it's definitely one of the best things to come out of being in WWE is meeting my wife. That's the good way of putting it. Again, that's another reason I'm not bitter. I'm not angry at all. I think I had a great time, and you never know what happens in the future. You never know. Weirder things have happened, but right now, I think wherever the roads will lead, it's going to be a fun ride. Absolutely. So there's a lot that he's spoken about there, and I don't think he's massively, probably he's disappointed, but Tommy End, Aleister Black, whatever you want to call him, he's going to be fine. He's going to be totally fine. A lot of people are excited to see what happens in the future because they remember. I remember, you remember, a lot of people remember what this guy was doing in NXT. And you know that whilst he said he likes boundaries and he likes rules and all that kind of stuff, just that smidge of creative freedom, of being say, look, these are boundaries and there are still rules. It's professional wrestling at the end of the day. It's not your company. But going into an AEW, an Impact Wrestling, a Ring of Honor, New Japan, whatever he goes, having that just a little bit more control over your character, not even maybe control over your character, just the ability to have people that are willing to listen to your ideas or want to go with your ideas or find you a little bit more relatable. That could be something really special. So I'm excited to see what happens with him in the future. Now, obviously, all of this has ramped up speculation about is WWE going to be sold, and no one knows, obviously. If there are plans of it, it's being very, very, very kept secret. It's interesting, though. There's been lots of recent speculation online and within WWE about potential sale of the company. Of course, WWE has made a number of budget cuts as of late, with one taking place in mid-April, as they did in April 2020, and another round coming in mid-May, and then yesterday's 6 releases. There's also major corporate restructuring going on in the last month or so, led by WWE President and Chief Revenue Officer Nick Khan. Now, Khan was brought into the company in August of 2020, and this latest corporate makeover is not the first action that has fueled rumors of a WWE sale to a company like Comcast, Fox, or Disney. Now, Khan appeared on Colin Cowherd's podcast to promote WrestleMania 37 back in April and discussed the potential sale. Cowherd pointed out to how WWE is a turbulent, around-the-clock lifestyle, and WWE Chairman and CEO Vince McMahon is at the point where he just doesn't need the money these days. He then speculated that WWE must have offers to sell and asked Khan why Vince doesn't let go of the company. Khan said he doesn't believe Vince wants to sell the company, mainly because he built it, and it's because he is the best person to run it. And because what else would he do? Khan also said that there was a WWE executive a few years back who asked where Vince was spending his summer, and Vince asked him what he was talking about. He planned to spend his summer in Stamford, Connecticut at the WWE HQ office. Khan noted that Vince won't be a guy who's relaxing on a yacht somewhere else. Now, after yesterday's releases were announced, former WWE writer Dave Schilling tweeted about why he thinks WWE is preparing for a sale. He said, quote, "You don't cut talent assets on this level unless you are trying to maximize profits before a sale." He added, "Braun is a legit top guy, a former world champion and a merchandise mover. Aleister Black was getting a push on TV last week. This is very telling." Now, Brandon Thurston of WrestleNomics wrote a lengthy Twitter piece on why he thinks WWE sale is not happening. He said, quote, "Foreboding that WWE is preparing to sell stuff of a cynical wrestling fan fatalism. New leadership came in August and is still in year 1. I would be shocked if WWE sells in Vince's lifetime. 1, Nick Khan indicated to Cowherd that Vince has no intention to sell. 2, I cannot imagine Vince doing anything else. Layoffs, releases, and restructuring probably have more to do with Nick Khan and Christina Salin critiquing and reshaping what George Barrios and Michelle Wilson left behind. Every few years, WWE has cut employee and talent headcounts. WWE had over 300 wrestlers under contract in 2020, way more than they need for basically no other reason than to hoard them from the competition. Doing so probably contributed to talent leverage in pay negotiations. New leadership might not see this approach as cost-effective. If you followed Vince's career, he's a control freak through and through. That tendency increased with time. I tend to believe control is priceless to him. When he's gone, sure, WWE might sell, and NBC Universal is the most obvious suitor and really only one that makes sense. So certainly, again, there's a ton of speculation right now as to if WWE is going to sell. And I get both sides of the argument. I do, in that sense. I think the general impression why WWE wouldn't sell is because Vince McMahon wouldn't sell. And Vince McMahon is a control freak. The only issue there is that there's kind of the implication there that if WWE was sold to a Fox, Comcast, Disney or whatever, there's kind of the indication that Vince McMahon wouldn't be in charge. But I don't know if that's the case. It depends on the deal. And Lord knows, I'm not an expert in corporate deals or anything like that, or corporate acquisitions or mergers or anything like that. I mean, I'm just a guy from the United Kingdom. I don't know. All I can give is my opinion. That's what we give on the channel. But who's to say that the UFC were sold a couple of years ago, right? Dana White's still the president. He doesn't own the company anymore, but he's still the president. He's still in charge. Marvel is a Disney property. You know, it's owned by Disney. Bob Iger is the CEO. I think he was. I don't know if he is anymore. But Kevin Feige still runs Marvel Studios, right? And he still has the be-all and end-all and the complete control over that situation. So who's to say if WWE wasn't sold to a Disney, they don't, as part of the deal, say, look, You're in charge. We just want to own it. And then, once Vince is gone, who knows what can happen in the future. I do really understand the point of view of WWE is trying to make themselves as profitable as possible right now. They're trying to say, look how profitable we are. Look at the revenue we have. Look at the profit margins, all that kind of stuff. And maybe getting rid of all of these people is proving them to be so profitable that when a company like Fox, like Disney, like Comcast looks at WWE and says, well, we've got to pay a pretty penny to buy this company because look at their profits. Look how valuable they are. I can understand both sides of it. Just because people will say, well, Vince McMahon would never sell because he's a control freak and he likes to be in charge, who's to say he wouldn't be in charge if he sells the company? It all depends on the deal. This is certainly really atypical, it feels like, of WWE. There are always releases and there are always corporate restructuring. And maybe this is a case of Nick Khan going in and saying, look, the guys before me absolutely ran you into the ground. You can be so much more. This is the same time as we're seeing these reports coming out saying, WWE wants to be the new Marvel. They see Marvel and they see themselves as being exactly the same. They can dominate film, movie, comic books, theme parks and all this kind of stuff. Maybe they do think the same. I just think that's telling. They're putting that narrative out there right now when there are rumors of a sale. They're trying to, advertise themselves to potential suitors. Look how much money we're making. Look how much revenues we've got. Look at the profits we have. We can be the new Marvel. Look how successful Marvel has been since they were bought by Disney. You could have the same thing. Buy us. Just leave Vince McMahon in charge. So me personally, if you had to say, oh, and what do you think's happening? I would say a sale. But I would say Vince McMahon still stays in charge. And people say, well, how does that work? They can make any deal they want work. It's Vince McMahon. Who's to say they can't make a deal work? So this is going to only continue. It's only going to continue. And it's fascinating in Night Raw because Monday Night Raw did its lowest audience ever this Monday. Now, obviously, you could say, well, that's not surprising. It was Memorial Day, but the numbers still aren't good. Monday's live Memorial Day edition of Monday Night Raw featuring Drew McIntyre defeating Kofi Kingston in a number one contenders main event drew an average of 1.418 million viewers on the USA Network. This is according to Nielsen via PW Torch. This is down 12.5% from last week's 1.621 million viewers. It's the lowest audience in Raw history. For this week's show, the first hour drew 1.536 million viewers. Last week's hour one drew 1.661 million. The second hour drew 1.549 million viewers. Last week's second hour is 1.655. And this is the really telling one, The final hour of Monday Night Raw this week, featuring that big main event between Kofi Kingston and Drew McIntyre, drew 1.168 million viewers. Whoa. Now, this week's Raw drew a 0.44 rating in the key 18 to 49 demographic. This is down only 2.22% from last week's 0.5 rating, which is interesting, of course, isn't it? Is that the viewership was down, but the demo was pretty much the same. So you've got the same amount of young people, or same amount of, the key demographic watching Raw, but that older audience just decided, you know what, screw it. Now, you could look into that certainly different ways. Do they maybe celebrate Memorial Day better than, or I would say better, but more than other people? I don't know. It's telling, and I said this last year, and I say it every time we do these stories talking about Raw low ratings or Raw high ratings or whatever. Last year, when it came out, Raw hits a record low. I said it doesn't matter because there will be a new record low in the next few months. And here we are. Now, I know it's a holiday, but it'll be interesting to see how Raw reacts from this because I don't blame you. If you didn't watch Raw, you didn't miss anything. It was awful. Yes, there were stakes in the main event, but that show was terrible. Absolutely terrible. There were two good matches on that show. One was the main event. The other was Xavier Woods versus Randy Orton. Apart from that, it was terrible. It was absolutely terrible. Reviewers here on YouTube are stopping watching Raw and stopping reviewing it because it's a waste of time. No one cares. And just Monday's audience reflects that, irrespective of Memorial Day. So I'm not going to talk about it anymore because it's not even news. It's not surprising. Let's talk about Tom Phillips. Tom Phillips has confirmed his departure from WWE and says he's excited for the future. It was reported back in May that Phillips had been released by the company after 9 years on the job. Now, WWE never officially announced his departure, which sucks. But Tom acknowledged his departure on Twitter last night and plugged a podcast interview, which is going to be released today. Now, Richard Deitch of Sports Media Podcast tweeted a plug for tomorrow's show and noted he'll be having Tom Phillips on the show to discuss his WWE exit and the challenges of calling WWE and what he hopes to do next. Phillips responded to the tweet and wrote, "Have a listen to this tomorrow. I'm so excited about the future." Now, of course, this is the first tweet Phillips has made since the news of his departure came out, and tomorrow's interview will be the first public comments he's made since then. So I'm sure we'll probably talk more in depth about that tomorrow in tomorrow's WWE news story. But look, I still don't get it. I think Jimmy Smith did an excellent job on Monday, it must be said, but this is a guy that could do everything, and it's just more cuts, and it's a shame. But we'll speak more about Tom Phillips tomorrow on the show here. And finally, there's some news about what WWE had planned for Santana Garrett. Of course, she was one of the names released yesterday as well. Now, reportedly, WWE did have plans for Santana Garrett to debut on SmackDown before she was released. Word is that Garrett was scheduled to make her official main roster debut as a SmackDown superstar. This is according to PW Insider. There had been reports that Garrett was being called up after her Women's Royal Rumble appearance back in January. Her situation was similar to the recently released Vanessa Bourne, where she never actually made it after the main roster and never actually made an official main roster debut and had been waiting for her arrival to be worked into the storylines. So, I mean, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? It makes you wonder how far these decisions go back, or the situation where it's a bit like Aleister Black we spoke about earlier. Maybe there were plans at one point and then someone told the creative team, just put a hold on it. And people were like, why? And they went, we can't tell you. And then find out that she's released. So I would assume that people have known these cuts are coming. Mark Henry spoke about the cuts that were coming. They've known about them for a while. They've just been trying to figure out where they were going and what the plan was for them, and now we know. Now we know really what the plans were, and they were just told, yeah, wait. So if you had plans around sort of January, December time, and WWE obviously put a hold on them, and if you were in limbo at that point, you were gone. And it's very unfortunate. It's very unfortunate. But look, guys, as always, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on all of these WWE news stories we've spoken about today? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about WWE, AEW, Impact Wrestling, New Japan Pro Wrestling, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved in the community. Drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. It really does help us out here on YouTube, get the rankings, and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestling News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right corner of the screen right now, or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or have you come across this video today, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon. Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.